Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Colonati. Today I'm going to tackle discussing the Earthsea cycle by Ursula Le Guin. Le Guin is one of my favorite authors of all time. She was very influential for me as a child and my taste in fantasy and science fiction, but also rereading her works as an adult has been very impactful as well. Le Guin passed away on January 22nd in 2018, and that was kind of the impetus for me to finally reread all of the Earthsea books. And in the previous couple of years, I've reread a lot of her really famous science fiction works like The Left Hand of Darkness and The Dispossessed, and for some reason I kept putting off the fantasy. But now I have reread all the books, I've refreshed my memories of them and updated my understandings of the stories, and I'm going to talk about all of the books. I'm going to talk about some of the history of the series, then the individual books, their plots, and my major impressions of them, and then I'm going to tackle the question of women in Earthsea and basically the evolution of feminism in Earthsea throughout the publication of the books. The Earthsea cycle is probably one of Le Guin's most famous works, especially the first novel, A Wizard of Earthsea. It is essentially young adult fantasy up until the fourth book. The first three were specifically written for a younger audience, but with the fourth book, Tehanu, they become much more mature and they're dealing with much older characters and basically issues of middle age that I think at that point they cease to be labeled as young adult. They're solidly adult fantasy in my opinion. It's my personal opinion that in order to really interpret and understand some of the major themes and feminist overtones of the series, you also have to know something about Le Guin's writing career and her evolution as a feminist and as a person, and just the context of her life, because the publication of Earthsea spans Le Guin's entire writing career from 1968 up to 2014, and that's many decades in which she basically had a feminist reawakening, wrote a lot of her other really famous works, and just life changes so much. So in that case, I'm going to be talking somewhat about Le Guin herself as a person and her own thoughts on some of these things, because I think that's actually really important to understand why she did some things in especially the later books in the series. I have to say that usually I like to split out the works from the authors somewhat, because I don't necessarily want to sound like I'm critiquing an author's life or personal views, but in this case, especially with reading these editions of the books which have Le Guin's afterwards her own thoughts and analysis of the series for every single book, it's really hard to separate the two. The publication history of these books is as such. A Wizard of Earthsea was published in 1968 and it was originally meant to just be a standalone. There wasn't a series planned at that point. The Tombs of Atuan followed in 1970. What's pretty important, I think, to know about the context of this book is that it was written after Le Guin wrote The Left Hand of Darkness, which is probably her most famous feminist science fiction novel. The Farthest Shore was published in 1972, and with the publication of this one, Earthsea was known as a trilogy for the next 18 years. In 1990, Le Guin came back to Earthsea and published Tehanu, the fourth novel, which is really different from the first three, and at this point the series was then known as a quartet. But that isn't it, because in 2001, Le Guin published both Tales from Earthsea, which is a collection of short stories, and the final novel, The Other Wind. And then, in 2014, she published the short story The Daughter of Odren, which is, as far as I'm aware, the last thing published in Earthsea. And now it's time to get into the guts of each of these books and what they are about. I think the first thing that everybody should know about Earthsea is about true names and how wizardry actually works. All things have a true name in the most ancient of languages, and wizardry derives its power from discovering and using these true names. People also have true names. They receive them in a naming ceremony, and then they keep that true name hidden for most of their lives from everybody. So it's really important and very momentous when characters who are still alive choose to reveal their true name to other people or to the world at large. Usually people are only known by their true name after they pass into death and into legend. People who go by their true names while still alive are pretty much living legends who say that they have nothing to fear from other people using their name against them. A Wizard of Earthsea introduces us to Sparrowhawk, a young man who is destined to become one of the greatest mages of all time in Earthsea. His true name is Ged, and I will refer to him as Ged from here on. In the beginning, as a child, he has magical talent and he desires power. He wants to learn magic so that he has power and control over the world. He decides to go to the School of Magic on the island of Roke and study there with the greatest wizards. And there, in his arrogance and his desire for power, and fueled by his jealousy and rivalry with other students, he performs a spell that is far outside his ability to control, and he lets a shadow of evil into the world through a crack. And this shadow, called a Gebeth, pursues him. Ged runs from this Gebeth across all of Earthsea because it wants to consume him and use his power, which will unleash a lot of evil in the world. Only Ged can stop it, only he can face it. And so the story is about him finishing what he started and facing himself. I love this story so much. I think it is a wonderful story of confronting oneself and knowing oneself truly and wholly. It is also a classic hero's journey. It conforms to all the steps of the diagrammed hero's journey, which means in many ways this is a very conventional, traditional fantasy novel. But I think I like it so much because it is classic and because it's an internal struggle. This is about knowing oneself in the end. Sure, there's physical action and there's an adventure across all of Earthsea, but most of the important stuff and the actual journey being taken is inside of Ged's mind. Every time I reread this book, I start out disliking Ged so much because of his arrogance, his stupidity, and his blindness, and by the end, I love him so much. I think it's really interesting to see how this book already firmly establishes the dominant themes of the entire Earthsea cycle, even though Le Guin wrote it at a time when she didn't necessarily think there were going to be any other books. It introduces desire for power and control, the misuse of power, maintaining a balance in all things in the world, and identity. This book also has so many amazing quotes. Things like, "Go on and do your work. Do it well. It is all you can do," which I've seen a lot of people mentioning since Le Guin passed away. And then this last one in particular, which I found very powerful. "He had made himself whole, a man who, knowing his whole true self, cannot be used or possessed by any power other than himself, and whose life, therefore, is lived for life's sake, and never in the service of ruin or pain or hatred or the dark." Which is pretty much the opposite of being a servant of power, which is really important in the rest of the series. Next up is the Tombs of Atuan, which is not set in the archipelago of Earthsea where Ged is from. It's actually set in the Kargad lands, specifically at the tombs on the island of Atuan. This story is told from the perspective of Tanar, also known as Arha, the Eaten One, first priestess of the Nameless Ones. And this story is dark. Often, quite literally, it takes place in the pitch black, where no light is ever supposed to come, of the underground catacombs and tombs and labyrinth beneath this temple. Tanar knows no life other than this one, and she is stifled within this cult, told that she has power, but in reality she is helpless. And then Ged arrives. He makes his way into the labyrinth underneath the temple, seeking an ancient treasure that's rumored to be there, which will help bring back peace to the world. And Tanar is furious. She's enraged at his act of sacrilege, coming into a place where no light is supposed to come and no one is supposed to go there except for her. And she plans a cruel death for him until they actually start talking, and he gives her back something that she had forgotten about herself, which is her name. I felt the power and the darkness of this story very differently as an adult versus when I was a child. In particular, I just found Tanar to be an amazing character. I loved seeing her growth throughout this book and the rest of the series, and I really understood the evolution of her relationship with Ged much better this time as well. The Tombs of Atuan is also where Le Guin begins to just barely ask questions about women's power, about power for people who aren't male wizards, basically. In the third book, The Farthest Shore, Ged returns as the protagonist. He goes on a quest with a young prince named Aaron to discover what is causing mages to lose their power. It seems there is some breach between life and death, and all good things in life, including power and magic, are seeping away. So they go to find this breach and fix it. And this journey takes them across Earthsea, across the archipelago, to the farthest shore, and into the land of the dead, across that stone wall which separates the living from the dead. This is the story with the least interest for me plot-wise in the entire cycle. I'm not really sure why, but maybe because it's pretty straightforward in its bones as the trials and testing of a young king. It's really about the fulfillment of the prophecy about the long-awaited king of Earthsea, and of course Ged plays a huge part in that. But that part of the story didn't really capture my interest. But there are some things about this book which are so important to later ones, going into the land of the dead and the archipelagans' view of death and where they think they go after they die, or actually where they know they go. That aspect of this world is so important, especially in the very last book in the series. And the consequences of this quest for Ged completely reshape him and have a huge impact on later books and his identity as well. Even though Tehanu, the fourth book, was published 18 years after The Farthest Shore, the action in The Farthest Shore is seamlessly continued on in Tehanu. There's no break chronologically between the two. In this one, Tanar has been living for many years on the island of Gaunt, which is Ged's birthplace. After she is widowed, she adopts a badly scarred and horribly abused little girl named Theru. And together, Tanar and Ged must take care of Theru because she is not just a little girl. I adored this book. Tehanu is the climax and the culmination of all things Earthsea for me. I can see why a lot of people don't like it very much though, because it is nothing like the first three books. This is the domestic novel of Earthsea. It is about middle age and identity crises. And there was no way that I could have understood this book when I was a kid. When I read it when I was maybe 12 years old, I did not like Tehanu. I did not understand it. And that's because this is about adults thinking about what it means to be an adult, to be grown up, to be old, and trying to reinvent their identity when something is stripped from them. In Ged's case, he's a grown man who no longer has the power that completely defined who he was for most of his life, for decades. And with Tanar, it's who is she? She's this foreign woman living in a land that is not her own, in a community that will always see her as being very different. I mean, she looks very different for one, but also her husband has died, her children no longer need her, and she herself doesn't understand why she has adopted this little girl, only that this girl needs her and she's important and she needs to do this. This book also finally head-on tackles the question of what is a woman's power? What kind of power do women have that men don't have, that isn't derived from men's power? What do middle-aged women and village witches and housewives have? It was amazing. It broke my heart. It made me rage inside. And I see now why I could just not have appreciated this story so much when I was younger, but I absolutely love it now. There's actually a passage from the book that I want to read to you about power and women and where women come from, that type of thing. It's a really well-known passage of the book, but I want to also read Tanar's response to it because it's the bit that made me go, yes! Especially after having read the Tombs of Atuan right before this. So this is the passage. Moss, the village witch, is speaking to Tanar. "Oh, well, dearie, a woman's a different thing entirely. Who knows where a woman begins and ends? Listen, mistress, I have roots. I have roots deeper than this island, deeper than the sea, older than the raising of the lands. I go back into the dark." Moss's eyes shone with a weird brightness in their red rims, and her voice sang like an instrument. "I go back into the dark. Before the moon I was. No one knows. No one knows. No one can say what I am, what a woman is, a woman of power, a woman's power, deeper than the roots of trees, deeper than the roots of islands, older than the making, older than the moon. Who dares ask questions of the dark? Who will ask the dark its name?" The old woman was rocking, chanting, lost in her incantation, but Tanar sat upright and split a reed down the center with her thumbnail. "I will," she said. She split another reed. "I lived long enough in the dark." That is why I love Tehanu. The fifth book in the Earthsea cycle is actually a story collection, and that is Tales from Earthsea. The 5 stories in this are set across hundreds of years in Earthsea. I particularly enjoyed the first and last stories. The first one, called The Founder, explains some of the history of magic in Earthsea and the founding of the School of Magic on Roke, and especially how important women were in preserving magic in Earthsea and establishing the university, and then being kind of shoved out of that and forgotten. The final one, Dragonfly, is a story that bridges Tehanu and the Other Wind, the final book. It introduces a character named Irian, who is really important in the Other Wind. The final novel in the Earthsea cycle is The Other Wind, and it addresses why the archipelagan afterlife is so dreary and painful, and it also addresses the growing imbalance of power in Earthsea that's been felt growing in the previous books. There is something seriously out of balance and awry in Earthsea, and that is affecting the dead and the living and the division between them in the archipelago. When archipelagans die, they go across this stone wall into the land of the dead, which is a dry and dead place. There's nothing else there. There are no plants, no animals, no dragons, and even foreign peoples don't go there to die either. Like the Kargish people, for example, they believe in reincarnation. They don't even go to this place. They're just reborn as something else. So what is it that the people of Earthsea did to upset the balance of life and death and prevent their dead from fully dying? Here, all the previous characters from the books return, and there are also some new people like poor, gentle Alder, whom I really loved, and they must take this one last journey to the roots of the world on Roke and go into the land of the dead and confront this wall of stones and the dead who want to die. At first, I thought this book would be one story too far, like wasn't Tehanu a good enough ending for the series? But it turns out I think this book had a lot more meaning for me right now after Le Guin's death, because this book is about the nature of death, about not defying death, not upsetting the balance between life and death, but actually dying and letting go and not trying to cheat. There is one quote from the end of this book that I want to share because I read it and I completely lost control of my emotions. I can just imagine Le Guin saying this herself. "I think," Tehanu said in her soft, strange voice, "that when I die, I can breathe back the breath that made me live. I can give back to the world all that I didn't do, all that I might have been and couldn't be, all the choices I didn't make. All the things I lost and spent and wasted. I can give them back to the world, to the lives that haven't been lived yet. That will be my gift back to the world that gave me the life I did live, the love I loved, the breath I breathed." There is one final story of Earthsea, and it's called The Daughter of Odren. This is a short story that's essentially a standalone. I couldn't see any real connections between it and the previous stories. This is about the daughter of a lord who was betrayed by his wife and her mage lover and imprisoned in a standing stone. His daughter, a woman named Weed, has been planning for years to right this wrong, and when her younger brother finally arrives, they go do it. However, they don't necessarily agree about who is at fault for what has been done. This story was just okay for me, to be honest. I think it really pales in comparison to the really great stories that came before it in Earthsea, but read it if you're a completionist. And those are the stories of the Earthsea cycle. For me, the themes of the whole series have been power, the misuse of power, maintaining a balance in the world, being aware of the repercussions of what you do, that everything you do will have an effect somewhere else in the world. And if things get out of sync, if there isn't an equilibrium, then that's when power becomes evil, I think. I would also say that for me personally, identity, like understanding one's personal identity and knowing oneself wholly, is a huge theme in the series. I'm not sure if Le Guin herself would pluck that out as a theme, but it's really important to me because I view all of these stories as so special because they are very inner struggles, they're very internal stories and journeys. Even when you have stories that physically go somewhere else and go to fantastic realms and stuff, I feel like all the important stuff happening is inside of people's heads and has to do with their personal relationship with, well, themselves, but also with power and with other people. From what I have gathered from Le Guin's afterwards to these books and her other essays and such on genre and writing, she really adamantly avoided writing stories about war, violence, and the distillation of good versus evil. I think, frankly, that she thought those types of stories were sometimes too artificial or bluntly heartless. She did not like that. And so I think that it's really noticeable that these stories don't do that. They're not about great forces of good versus evil. It's really one person against another single person when there is head-on conflict like that. And so for me, these stories, the Earthsea stories and pretty much anything else I've read by Le Guin, bear no resemblance to a lot of really popular modern epic fantasy right now. I really enjoy that. I enjoy that these are quieter, slower, personal stories. I think I might still have a little bit of time left here at the end before my battery goes dead to talk about the evolution of feminism and the role of characters in Earthsea. Now, I did specifically reread these books with women in mind because I had been planning to reread the books for a while because I've had a couple of people come to me and comment that they tried reading Le Guin for the first time as adults with A Wizard of Earthsea and were really put off because of this disconnect between Le Guin as a really famous feminist icon in SFF and the fact that A Wizard of Earthsea contains some really sexist stuff. Like, there's nothing feminist at all about A Wizard of Earthsea, and I didn't remember any of this, so I really wanted to go through all the books to see how this evolved, because I was pretty sure that Le Guin corrected at some point, and I'm happy to say that she did. So let me describe the situation and the lack of women in A Wizard of Earthsea. This book is about a man doing a thing that it's implied only men get to do in this world, basically from a male perspective. It's all about wizards. Only men get to be wizards. And it's implied with some of the statements in this, like on page 6, there is a saying on Gaunt, weak as women's magic, and there is another saying, wicked as woman's magic, which says women shouldn't have power, women don't have power, because if they did, they'll be foolish and weak and awful things will happen. And that's kind of sexist. I don't think this book is feminist. I don't think it was trying to be. I think it just reflected the status quo at the time, and I think that's how Le Guin has explained it too. But she realized that after she wrote it pretty quickly, it sounds like, and she went through a feminist awakening or reawakening after it was written. And frankly, I think she was a little bit embarrassed by the situation, the lack of women in this book. Sure, there are some really secondary characters who are women, but only one of them is named and has her own dialogue. And she's evil, and she's punished for kind of being evil. So I think there is a huge difference between this book and the later ones. I think Le Guin set out to very specifically change the situation. She wanted to write women in this world. She wanted to give women a genuine voice and not just shove women into man-shaped holes in the world, basically. And so for that reason, I think you can really see an evolution and a slow progress of women in the story throughout the entire series. And I like this. It's not the quick fix that I think maybe a lot of people would like to see, because it does reflect reality. It reflects the reality of Le Guin's own thinking throughout the decades and what she thought was possible. She wanted this to remain rooted in reality in some way. And I would rather see that slow and not perfect progression than get a band-aid slapped on it, because I think it shows the difficulty and the hard work involved in telling a good story where all the parts of it ring true, even the women. I can say now that I've reread the books that I don't like the misogynistic stuff in A Wizard of Earthsea. It's that casual, ingrained stuff that women are told to believe about themselves. And in that way, I find it less offensive than just plain sad. Because even today in the 21st century, there are a lot of women in this world who think that way about themselves. But I'm really happy to see how it's corrected, like course corrected throughout the entire series. I think it ends up being something really great and a really great story about both men and women. And those are all of my thoughts on the Earthsea cycle by Ursula Le Guin. I'm so glad that I reread these books. I'm sure I will do that again in the future and have another completely different perspective on them than when I'm older. I would also really recommend these books for fantasy lovers. They are classics in the genre for a reason. And I think that as long as you go into the first book with an understanding of its flaws and that things get a lot better in later books, that it is also really, really enjoyable. If you have any thoughts on the Earthsea series or Le Guin's work that you want to share, please leave me a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.